They gave her only stale bread, until a lonely baker offered fresh loaves, and his heart Elena woke before the sun, as she always did. The village was still quiet, and a thin mist hung low over the cobbled streets. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, shivering against the early morning chill. Hunger had become a familiar companion, one she could never fully ignore, no matter how hard she tried. Today, like every day, she would walk to the market to try her luck, hoping she might find something to eat. The streets were empty, except for a few farmers making their way to the fields. Elena walked slowly, careful not to draw attention to herself. People in the village knew her, but only in the way one knows a shadow that passes quickly by. They had grown used to seeing her, yet they rarely offered a helping hand. She carried no money and could only hope that the kindness of others might give her a small piece of bread or some scraps to fill her stomach. By the time she reached the market, the sun had begun to rise, casting a pale golden light across the stalls. The smells of the market were familiar. The sharp scent of fresh vegetables, the faint sweetness of fruit, and the warm, yeasty aroma of bread. Elena's stomach growled. She had not eaten anything since the day before, and the empty feeling in her belly pressed heavily on her chest. She approached the first stall, a small wooden cart piled with loaves. The baker, a stern-looking man with a thick mustache, glanced at her as she neared. "What do you want?" he asked, not unkindly, but with a sense of impatience. Elena hesitated. She had come here many times before and knew what awaited her. The baker's cart was full of fresh bread, but she never received any of it. Instead, he handed her a small, hard, dry loaf that had been left over from yesterday. Elena took it quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she held it. The crust was tough, the inside dry and crumbly. She had learned to chew it slowly, savoring every bite, but even that small pleasure was fleeting. Other villagers watched from a distance, some with curiosity, others with indifference. A child playing nearby glanced at her, and Elena offered a small smile. The child smiled back and ran off, leaving her with the heavy feeling of loneliness. She moved on to the next stall, where a woman sold eggs and vegetables. Elena's hope rose slightly, but it was quickly dashed. The woman shook her head and turned away, muttering something about having nothing to spare. Elena's heart sank, but she kept walking. She had grown accustomed to disappointment, but that did not make it any easier to bear. Elena found a small corner near the fountain, where she sat on the cold stone and broke the stale bread into pieces. She chewed slowly, imagining that it might taste sweeter if she concentrated hard enough. Around her, the market buzzed with life. Farmers shouted their prices, children ran past, and the villagers went about their business as if she were invisible. The contrast between their laughter and her quiet solitude made her feel even smaller, like a shadow among the bright colors of the morning. As she ate, Elena thought about her life. She had grown up in this village, but she had never felt a true sense of belonging. Her parents had died when she was young, leaving her to fend for herself. She had learned to survive on her own, to find strength in small victories, and to keep hope alive, even when it seemed impossible. Still, some days were harder than others. Days like this, when the bread was dry, the sun was cold, and the world seemed determined to ignore her. She remembered the times when she had seen travelers pass through the village. They carried baskets full of fresh bread, meats, and fruits, laughing and talking as they moved from one stall to another. Elena would watch from a distance, wishing she could share in their warmth and abundance. Those moments left a bitter ache in her chest, a mixture of longing and loneliness that she could never quite shake. Despite it all, Elena did not give up. She had learned to find small joys where she could: the first rays of sunlight on the fountain, the sound of birds singing, or the kindness of a child's smile. These tiny moments reminded her that not all was lost and that there was still goodness in the world, even if it was hard to find. As the morning progressed, more villagers arrived at the market. They moved quickly, selecting the freshest goods for themselves and often ignoring the presence of those less fortunate. Elena kept her head down, not wanting to be noticed, yet she could not help but see the abundance around her. It was a strange mixture of beauty and cruelty, a sight of plenty when one had so little. By midday, Elena had finished the small loaf of stale bread. Her stomach still grumbled, but she had no other options. She rose slowly, brushing crumbs from her clothes, and began the long walk back to her small, empty room above the old workshop where she stayed. It was not much, a simple wooden space with a thin mattress and a small window, but it was hers. It provided shelter, however humble, and a place to rest after the long hours of searching for food. As she walked, she noticed the villagers going about their routines, some carrying baskets full of food, others chatting and laughing. She tried to ignore the pangs of envy that rose in her chest. Instead, she focused on the path ahead, the rhythm of her footsteps grounding her in the present. She reminded herself that she was still here, still alive, and that tomorrow was another day. In the quiet moments of the afternoon, Elena often thought about the possibility of kindness. She had experienced little, but she believed it existed somewhere, waiting to be discovered. The thought gave her a fragile hope, a small flame she carried within herself. Perhaps one day someone would notice her, not just the bread she ate, but the person she was, with her dreams, her struggles, and her heart. And so she continued. Day after day she rose before the sun, walked to the market, and accepted what little was offered to her. The routine was hard, the hunger persistent, and the loneliness pressing, but Elena held on. She had no choice but to survive, and in her survival she found a quiet strength that others rarely saw. She did not know it yet, but her life was about to change. The small acts of endurance, the patience, and the hope she carried like a hidden treasure would soon intersect with a kindness she had never expected. A quiet observer in the village had noticed her, someone who, like her, had known loneliness and hardship. That person would soon offer her more than just bread. He would offer warmth, understanding, and perhaps even friendship. But for now, Elena walked alone, her hands empty except for the remnants of stale bread, her heart heavy yet unbroken. She carried with her a quiet dignity, a steadfast belief that life could be better, even when the world seemed determined to show her otherwise. In her eyes was a gentle spark, a silent promise to herself that she would continue to hope, to endure, and to keep walking, step by step, toward a future she could not yet see. And as the village continued its busy life around her, Elena moved like a shadow among the light, unseen by most, yet carrying within her the quiet courage of someone who had learned to survive, to dream, and to believe that even in the harshest times, kindness could still find its way to her. Marco had lived in the village for many years, though he often felt as if he had lived a lifetime without truly being seen. His small bakery stood at the edge of the market, a warm place filled with the scent of yeast, sugar, and freshly baked bread. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could pour himself into his work and forget, at least for a few hours, the quiet emptiness of his life. He had once been married, and his wife had been the light of his days. But that was long ago. Time and grief had left him alone, with only the soft hum of the oven and the rhythm of kneading dough to keep him company. Marco's hands were rough from years of work, yet careful and skilled. Every loaf he baked was made with precision, a quiet reflection of the care he had once given to his home and his loved ones. Each morning Marco rose before dawn, The village streets were silent, and the only sound was the soft whistle of the wind and the distant crowing of roosters. He started his fire, mixed the flour and water, and began kneading the dough. The process was familiar and comforting, a quiet ritual that connected him to something bigger than himself. Yet, even as he worked, there was an emptiness that no amount of bread could fill. It was during one of these early mornings that Marco first noticed her. Elena. She moved through the market with quiet steps, her eyes downcast, her hands clutching the small piece of stale bread she had been given. Marco watched from his bakery window, hidden behind the warm glow of the oven. There was something about the way she carried herself, despite her hunger and the hardship she faced, that caught his attention. She did not complain, did not beg loudly, yet there was a sadness in her eyes that spoke louder than words ever could. He began noticing her more often. Every day she walked the same path, visited the same stalls, and accepted the same meager offerings. Other villagers barely glanced at her, yet Marco found himself thinking about her long after the market had emptied. He wondered what it was like to live like that, to face the world with such quiet determination while carrying hunger and loneliness as constant companions. One morning, Marco decided to do something he had not done in many years. He baked a few extra loaves, still warm from the oven, and placed them carefully on the edge of the market where he knew Elena would walk. He watched from the window, heart pounding with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. Would she take them? Would she trust that someone had done this for her? Elena appeared, as always, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She noticed the fresh loaves immediately and hesitated. She had grown used to disappointment, to receiving the bare minimum, and this sudden kindness felt almost unreal. Slowly, she picked up a loaf, feeling its soft warmth. A small, hopeful smile spread across her face, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Marco watched quietly, unsure if he should approach her or remain hidden. The joy he saw in her eyes was enough to fill a corner of the emptiness he had carried for so long. There was no rush, no words spoken, only a simple act of giving that bridged the gap between two lonely hearts. Over the next few days, Marco continued the small gestures. Sometimes he left a loaf of bread, other times a small bundle of rolls or pastries. Elena began to notice the pattern, and her initial suspicion slowly turned into gratitude and trust. She would nod in thanks or offer a shy smile, and though they had not yet spoken, a silent connection began to form. It was not long before Marco decided to speak. One chilly morning he stepped out of the bakery and called softly, "Good morning." Elena turned, startled, clutching her bread. Marco smiled gently and introduced himself. "I'm Marco," he said. "I bake the bread you've been finding here." Elena blinked, unsure what to say. She had not expected the giver of the bread to speak to her. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marco nodded, understanding her hesitation. "You're welcome," he replied. "I just wanted to help. You shouldn't have to eat stale bread every day." The conversation was simple, yet it marked the beginning of something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, Marco and Elena spoke more often. Their conversations were short at first, about the weather, the market, the bread, but they gradually grew longer. Elena began to feel comfortable, sharing small details about her life, her struggles and her dreams. Marco listened carefully, never judging, always offering kindness and encouragement. Through these interactions, both of them began to change. Marco found a sense of purpose in helping Elena, a warmth that he had not felt in years. He discovered that giving, even in small ways, could bring immense joy, not just to the receiver, but to the giver as well. Elena, on the other hand, began to feel hope for the first time in a long while. She realized that there were still people who cared, who could see her not as a burden, but as a person worthy of respect and kindness. One day, as the sun began to set, Marco invited Elena into the bakery. It was a small gesture, but it carried enormous significance. The bakery, with its warm light and the smell of fresh bread, felt safe and welcoming, a place where Elena could forget her hardships for a while. She stepped inside, nervous but curious, and Marco offered her a seat. He poured her a cup of warm tea and handed her a freshly baked roll. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the warmth of the oven and the soft light creating a peaceful atmosphere. Elena looked around, taking in the bakery's simple charm, the shelves lined with bread, the flour-dusted counters, and the quiet hum of the oven. Oh, it was a world away from the harshness of the market, a place where she could simply exist without fear or judgment. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They laughed together, shared stories, and began to rely on each other in small ways. Marco taught Elena how to knead dough and shape bread, and she discovered a hidden talent she had never explored before. Through these shared moments, they found companionship, understanding, and a sense of belonging that had been missing from both of their lives. Yet, life in the village was not without its challenges. Some villagers whispered about the unlikely friendship, questioning why a baker would care for someone like Elena. They did not understand the quiet joy that came from simple acts of kindness, nor did they see the warmth and connection growing between the two. Elena, too, struggled with pride and hesitation. She had spent so long fending for herself that accepting help felt strange, even uncomfortable at times. Despite these obstacles, Marco and Elena continued to support each other. Each loaf of bread, each shared story, and each moment of laughter strengthened their bond. They discovered that kindness could be a powerful force, one that could heal wounds, build trust, and create hope where there had been none. Marco began to notice subtle changes in Elena. Her shoulders no longer slumped with the weight of constant hunger and despair. Her eyes sparkled with a hint of optimism, and she began to move with a quiet confidence he had not seen before. In turn, Elena noticed changes in Marco. The lines of loneliness on his face softened. His smile grew more frequent, and a warmth radiated from him that had been missing for years. Through their growing connection, both learned important lessons. Marco realized that opening his heart to others did not make him weak. It made him stronger. Elena understood that accepting kindness was not a sign of failure, but a recognition of her own worth. Together they discovered that the simple act of sharing bread could lead to profound human connection, bridging loneliness and creating a sense of family where none had existed. And so, day by day, loaf by loaf, conversation by conversation, the lives of the lonely baker and the young woman who had known only stale bread began to intertwine. The market, once a place of struggle and invisibility for Elena, became a place where she felt seen. The bakery, once a quiet and empty space for Marco, became filled with laughter, warmth, and the promise of new beginnings. They did not yet know what the future would hold, but in those small, shared moments, they found something priceless. The knowledge that, even in a world that could be harsh and indifferent, there were still acts of kindness, still hearts willing to care, and still hope waiting to be discovered. Elena had begun to look forward to her visits to the bakery each morning, the warmth from the oven, the scent of freshly baked bread, and Marco's gentle presence offered her a sense of comfort she had not known for many years. It was a world away from the harsh reality of the market, where she had spent so much of her life being overlooked and given only stale bread. Here she felt seen, valued, and even a little happy. Marco, for his part, also looked forward to these mornings. He had grown used to Elena's quiet laughter, her shy smiles, and the way her eyes lit up when she tasted something fresh and warm. He found joy in her appreciation, joy that he had not felt in years. Baking was no longer just a routine. It was a way to connect, to share something real and meaningful with another human being. Their conversations had grown longer and more personal. Elena began to tell Marco about her childhood, her parents, and the challenges she had faced living alone in the village. She spoke carefully, at first, as if testing the waters, but soon the words flowed more freely. Marco listened without interruption, offering small nods, soft smiles, and words of encouragement. He did not judge, and that lack of judgment was a balm to Elena's weary heart. One day, as Elena carefully shaped a loaf of bread under Marco's guidance, she paused and looked up at him. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked softly. Marco paused too, brushing flour from his hands. He looked at her, considering the question. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I have been alone for many years. Baking was my only companion for a long time." Elena nodded. "I understand. I have been alone too, most of my life. But you make it easier to feel like I'm not completely invisible." Marco's heart warmed. The words, so simple and honest, struck a chord deep within him. For years he had lived in silence, and now, through Elena, he had found someone who truly saw him. It was a quiet, unspoken bond that did not need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was built on trust, understanding, and shared moments, small but meaningful. Despite the joy they found in each other's company, the village did not always understand. Whispers began to circulate, subtle at first, almost unnoticed. A villager would mutter under their breath, "Why does the baker care for her so much?" Or, "It seems unusual for someone like her to spend so much time at his bakery." Elena felt these whispers, but she tried to ignore them. She did not want their opinions to affect the happiness she had finally found. Marco, too, was aware of the subtle judgment from others. He had always been a private man, but he could not help noticing the curious glances and quiet comments as he walked through the market. It was a challenge, but he decided it would not deter him from doing what felt right. Elena's presence had reminded him of the joy of caring for someone else, and he was not willing to give that up. One chilly morning, as a thin fog rolled over the village streets, Elena arrived at the bakery to find Marco kneading dough by the oven. The warmth filled the room, and for a moment, all the worries of the market and the whispers of the villagers seemed far away. She smiled, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and Marco returned the smile, handing her a small apron. "Today, I want you to try something new," he said. "We're going to make rolls, shaped like little stars. They are a bit tricky, but I think you'll enjoy it." Elena's eyes widened with excitement. She loved learning from Marco, and the bakery had become a place where her imagination and creativity could flourish. She followed his instructions carefully, rolling the dough with gentle hands, shaping each star with care. Marco watched, offering advice, correcting gently when needed, and praising her efforts. As they worked side by side, the bond between them grew stronger. The bakery was filled with laughter and the soft hum of conversation, a stark contrast to the harsh, lonely mornings Elena had once endured at the market. They shared small stories, memories, and hopes for the future. Each story, each smile, each shared moment strengthened the invisible thread connecting their hearts. But life in the village still had its difficulties. One afternoon, as Elena was walking home after helping Marco close the bakery, she overheard a group of villagers whispering nearby. "I don't understand why the baker spends so much time with her," one woman said. "It's not proper." Elena's stomach tightened, a familiar mix of fear and shame rising in her chest. She had worked so hard to feel accepted, and now these whispers threatened to undo the fragile sense of belonging she had found. She hurried home, trying to ignore the voices, but they lingered in her mind, making her doubt herself. That evening, Marco noticed Elena's unease. They were cleaning the bakery together, and she moved quietly, her movements slower than usual. "Is something wrong?" Marco asked gently. Elena hesitated, then shook her head. "It's nothing, just some villagers saying things." Marco placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Elena, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You are kind, hard-working, and brave. Don't let the opinions of others dim the light you carry." His words, simple yet full of warmth, eased the tension in her heart. She nodded, feeling comforted by his presence. It was in moments like these that Elena realized how much Marco had become a part of her life, not just a source of fresh bread, but a source of strength, kindness, and understanding. As the days passed, their friendship continued to deepen. They shared more than just bread. They shared dreams, fears, and the small joys of everyday life. Marco taught Elena about the art of baking, the science of dough, and the importance of patience. In return, Elena brought laughter and lightness into Marco's quiet life, reminding him that life could still hold beauty and connection even after years of loneliness. One day, Elena confided in Marco about her dream of one day running her own small bakery stall. She imagined a place where everyone, regardless of wealth or status, could enjoy fresh bread and pastries. Marco listened intently, his heart swelling with pride and hope. "That is a wonderful dream," he said, "and I will help you however I can. You deserve to see it come true." The idea of sharing knowledge and helping Elena grow brought Marco a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that his own life, once so empty and routine, was now full of purpose. Through their friendship, he discovered that giving and caring for others could heal wounds, create joy, and form bonds stronger than anything he had known before. Even with the challenges from the villagers, Marco and Elena found ways to support each other. They laughed at the small misunderstandings, ignored the whispers that tried to undermine their bond, and focused on the goodness in their lives. Each loaf of bread, each shared story, and each quiet moment together became a small victory over the loneliness and hardship that had once defined them. By the end of Part 3, Elena and Marco had built a foundation of trust and care that could not easily be shaken. The villagers' whispers still lingered at the edges, but they had little power over the strength of a bond forged in kindness, understanding, and shared humanity. Elena's world, once so small and filled with hardship, had begun to expand. She now had a place where she felt safe, valued, and hopeful. A place where she was seen and cared for, and where her own courage and kindness could grow. The bakery had become more than just a place to find fresh bread. It was a sanctuary of warmth, trust, and companionship. Through small acts of sharing and simple gestures of care, Elena and Marco had discovered that even in a world that could sometimes feel harsh and indifferent, there were spaces where kindness and connection could flourish. And so each day they continued to meet, to bake, and to share. Elena learned that life could be brighter than she had imagined, and Marco learned that opening one's heart could bring joy in ways he had long forgotten. Together they faced the challenges of the village and their own insecurities, building a bond that would sustain them through the struggles yet to come. In the quiet moments between kneading dough and breaking bread, they found a sense of family, a sense of home, and a sense of hope. The world beyond the bakery might still be harsh, but within its walls they discovered a truth far more powerful than fear or loneliness. that kindness, compassion, and shared moments could transform lives, one loaf at a time. The days in the village passed with a rhythm that had become both comforting and challenging for Elena and Marco. Their mornings began with the soft warmth of the bakery oven and the scent of fresh bread, and their evenings were filled with quiet conversation and shared laughter. But life outside the bakery was not so gentle. The village had its routines, its expectations, and its judgments, and Elena and Marco were increasingly aware that their friendship was being watched. Despite the quiet whispers, their bond grew stronger each day. Elena found herself smiling more often, her steps lighter as she moved through the market, and her heart less burdened by the constant worry of survival. Marco, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that helping Elena and seeing her grow gave him a reason to rise each morning with hope, rather than resignation. Yet, the world around them was not entirely welcoming. Some villagers still questioned their unusual friendship. "Why does he give her so much attention?" one woman muttered as she passed the bakery. "It is not proper," said another, shaking her head. Elena had learned to ignore such comments, focusing instead on the kindness she received from Marco and the small victories of each day. Marco, however, felt a quiet tension whenever he heard these whispers. He had always been a private man, but now he was being observed more closely than ever. One afternoon, Marco noticed a man at the market glaring at Elena. The man, a farmer known for his sharp tongue, muttered something under his breath as Elena walked by with a loaf of fresh bread. Marco approached, careful not to start a confrontation, and said quietly, "Elena is my friend, and she deserves kindness just like anyone else." The farmer shrugged and walked away, but the encounter left a lingering unease. Marco realized that not everyone would accept their friendship without question, and he began to prepare Elena for the subtle challenges they might face together. Elena, while grateful for Marco's support, also struggled with feelings of pride and insecurity. She had spent so long fending for herself that accepting help felt strange, even uncomfortable. Some days she worried that she was being a burden or that her presence might cause Marco trouble. But Marco reassured her gently, saying, "You are not a burden. You bring life and joy into this bakery and into my life. We are stronger together than apart." Their shared work in the bakery became a source of strength. They experimented with new recipes, tried different bread shapes, and even created small pastries to attract more customers. Elena discovered that she had a natural talent for baking, and Marco encouraged her at every step. Each successful loaf and each satisfied smile from a customer filled them both with pride and joy. The bakery, once quiet and solitary, now felt alive with energy, laughter, and a sense of purpose. But it was not just the work that strengthened their bond. They shared stories from their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. Marco spoke of his late wife, of the years of loneliness that had followed, and of the joy he now found in Elena's companionship. Elena shared memories of her parents, of the struggles she had faced growing up alone, and of her hope for a future where she could live with dignity and purpose. In these moments, they found understanding, comfort, and the quiet assurance that they were not alone. One evening, as the sun set behind the village rooftops, Marco and Elena sat on a small bench outside the bakery, sharing a simple meal of bread and cheese. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the soft light reflected in Elena's eyes. "I never imagined life could be like this," she said softly. "I always thought I would be alone forever, surviving day by day. But now, I feel like there is hope." Marco smiled, his eyes reflecting the same warmth he felt in his heart. "There is always hope, Elena. Sometimes it takes someone else to remind us of it, and sometimes that hope is stronger when shared. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed by the younger villagers, however. A few children, curious and innocent, began visiting the bakery more often, drawn by the warmth, laughter, and delicious smells. They watched Elena and Marco work, mimicking their actions and asking questions. Elena laughed as a small boy tried to shape dough into a lopsided star, and Marco patiently guided him, correcting gently and encouraging him. These moments reminded them that kindness could ripple outward, touching more lives than they had imagined. Yet challenges continued to arrive. One particularly cold morning, a strong wind swept through the village, making the market streets nearly empty. Elena arrived at the bakery shivering, her shawl damp from the mist. Marco quickly brought her inside, offering her a warm cup of tea and a fresh roll. "The market is cruel today," he said softly, "but here you are safe and warm." Elena's eyes filled with gratitude. She realized that Marco's care was more than just a gesture. It was a constant, a presence she could rely on when the world felt harsh and unforgiving. In turn, Marco saw how Elena's resilience and gentle spirit had brought light into his life, transforming the bakery from a place of solitude into a sanctuary of friendship and trust. As winter approached, their partnership in the bakery became even more important. They worked together to prepare for the cold months, baking extra bread and pastries to sell, ensuring that the bakery remained a place of warmth and sustenance for anyone in need. Their teamwork strengthened not only the business but also their personal connection. Each shared task, each successful loaf, and each satisfied customer reinforced the growing bond between them. Slowly, the villagers began to notice the positive change in both Elena and Marco. Some started visiting the bakery more frequently, drawn by the warmth, kindness, and joy that radiated from within. The initial whispers of doubt and judgment began to fade as people saw the genuine care and dedication that defined their relationship. Elena and Marco's acts of kindness were no longer just private gestures. They became a quiet inspiration for the village, showing that compassion and friendship could overcome suspicion and indifference. Despite the progress, there were still moments of doubt and insecurity. Elena occasionally questioned whether she deserved this kindness and whether she could truly belong in the village. Marco, too, felt the weight of past loneliness pressing against the happiness he now felt. But they faced these uncertainties together, offering reassurance, understanding, and encouragement. Each challenge became an opportunity to strengthen their bond, to prove that their connection was resilient and enduring. One particularly memorable afternoon, a small group of villagers arrived at the bakery, curious about the warmth and laughter that had begun to emanate from within. They watched as Elena and Marco worked side by side, kneading dough, shaping bread, and sharing smiles. The children played nearby, laughing and learning from their example. Slowly, the adults began to understand that this friendship was not unusual or improper. It was simply a bond built on respect, trust, and shared humanity. By the end of Part 4, Elena and Marco had weathered both the subtle judgments of the village and the challenges of everyday life. Their connection had grown deeper, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and acts of kindness that transcended words. The bakery had become more than just a place to find fresh bread. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of human connection. In these moments, they discovered that life, even in a small village filled with hardship and whispers of judgment, could be brightened by genuine care, friendship, and compassion. The world outside the bakery might still be challenging, but within its warm walls, Elena and Marco had created a space where kindness and love could thrive. They had learned that even in difficult times, Shared hope and understanding could illuminate the darkest days. As the last rays of sunlight faded and the bakery's warm glow spilled into the quiet streets, Elena and Marco shared a simple meal and a quiet conversation. They laughed, they shared dreams, and they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. And in those moments they understood something profound, that small acts of kindness, patience, and trust could change lives, create bonds, and even inspire a village to see the world with new eyes. They did not yet know what challenges the future might bring, but they were ready to face them together. They had discovered that life was richer and fuller when shared, that hope could grow in unexpected places, and that even the loneliest hearts could find warmth, friendship, and love when given a chance. The sun rose slowly over the village, casting a soft golden glow across the cobbled streets. The market was beginning to stir, but Elena did not hurry there today. She had learned to cherish these quiet mornings where the world seemed still and full of possibility. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, feeling the gentle warmth of the bakery behind her and the sense of hope in her heart. Marco had already begun his day, kneading dough and tending the oven. The smell of fresh bread filled the small bakery, as it always did, but today there was a special energy in the air. Elena entered, smiling, her hands ready to help shape the dough into loaves and pastries. They had been working together for months now, and their routine had grown into something beautiful, a shared rhythm of cooperation, laughter, and silent understanding. "Good morning," Marco said, his voice warm and inviting. Elena smiled and nodded, feeling a familiar comfort in his presence. She placed her hands on the dough, kneading with care, feeling the warmth and softness beneath her fingers. The act of baking had become more than just a way to pass the time or earn a living. It was a connection, a shared creation that bound them together in ways neither had expected. As they worked side by side, Marco looked at Elena and noticed the light in her eyes. She had changed since the first day he had seen her accepting stale bread from the market. Her shoulders were no longer tense, her steps no longer hesitant, and her smile seemed to shine from a place deep within. He realized that their bond had given her something priceless: confidence, hope, and the knowledge that she was seen and valued. Elena, for her part, had discovered a sense of purpose and belonging she had never known. The bakery was no longer just a place to escape the cold or find warm bread. It had become a home, a sanctuary where she could grow, learn, and dream. She cherished the moments spent with Marco, listening to his stories, learning his techniques, and sharing small victories in the kitchen. Each loaf they created together was a symbol of their shared effort, trust, and friendship. But the village outside was still watching, and change was never immediate. Some villagers continued to whisper about the unusual friendship, questioning why a baker would care so much for a young woman. Yet, as more days passed, the impact of Elena and Marco's kindness could no longer be ignored. Children played in the bakery, learning to shape dough and laugh freely, while adults began to visit more often, drawn by the warmth and joy that emanated from within. The whispers of doubt began to fade, replaced by curiosity, admiration, and eventually respect. One crisp morning, a small crowd gathered outside the bakery, watching Elena and Marco work. The children ran around, shaping their own little loaves and sharing them proudly with their parents. Villagers, initially hesitant, began to approach, asking questions, complimenting the bread, and even offering to help in small ways. Elena and Marco welcomed them with smiles and gentle guidance, sharing their knowledge and kindness without hesitation. It was in these moments that the true transformation became clear. The bakery was no longer just a place of work. It had become a center of community, a symbol of hope and generosity. People who had once ignored Elena now saw her as a skilled, capable young woman. Marco, once a solitary figure, had become a pillar of kindness and support in the village. Together they had created a space where compassion could flourish, and in doing so, they had changed not only their own lives, but the lives of those around them. Despite the growing admiration from the villagers, Elena and Marco's relationship remained grounded in simplicity and sincerity. They continued to share quiet mornings in the bakery, baking bread, shaping pastries, and talking about dreams. One day, Elena confided in Marco about her long-held wish to open a small bakery stall of her own, a place where everyone, regardless of wealth or status, could enjoy fresh bread and pastries. Marco listened attentively, his eyes filled with pride and encouragement. "You could do it, Elena," he said. "You have the talent, the heart, and the determination. I will help you in any way I can." His words, simple yet full of meaning, filled Elena with hope and determination. She realized that the bond they shared had given her the courage to pursue her dreams, to imagine a future she had once thought impossible. As the seasons changed, the bakery continued to thrive. Elena's skills grew, her confidence strengthened, and her friendship with Marco deepened into a profound, enduring connection. They laughed together, shared stories, and celebrated small victories, knowing that the journey they had begun together was far from ordinary. Each loaf of bread, each shared smile, and each act of kindness reinforced the bond between them, creating a foundation of trust, respect, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village streets grew quiet, Marco and Elena sat together outside the bakery, enjoying a simple meal. The sky was painted with shades of pink and gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of bread and blossoms from nearby gardens. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together, the challenges they had faced, and the joy they had found in each other's company. "Elena," Marco said softly, "I never imagined life could be this full of warmth and happiness. You have brought light into my days, and I am grateful for every moment we share." Elena reached out, placing her hand gently on his. "And you, Marco, have shown me that kindness and care are more powerful than I ever imagined. I feel safe, valued, and hopeful because of you. Thank you for everything." Their eyes met, and in that quiet moment, the world outside the bakery seemed to fade away. It was not just bread or pastries that connected them. It was the shared experiences, the understanding, and the trust they had built together. They had discovered that true companionship could heal loneliness, bring joy, and inspire hope in ways that neither had expected. The village, too, had begun to change. People who had once whispered with suspicion now watched with admiration. They saw the kindness, patience, and generosity that defined Elena and Marco's bond. Slowly, the villagers began to embrace similar values, offering small acts of help to neighbors, welcoming children into their homes, and learning to appreciate the quiet beauty of compassion and connection. Elena's dream of a small bakery stall began to take shape. With Marco's guidance and support, she prepared to open a modest stand where villagers could purchase fresh bread and pastries. It was a symbol not only of her skill and independence, but also of the lessons she had learned, that perseverance, trust, and kindness could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. The day of the stall's opening arrived, and the village gathered to celebrate. Children laughed as they shaped small loaves of dough. Parents admired the fresh pastries, and the villagers marveled at Elena's talent and determination. Marco stood beside her, smiling with pride, knowing that their journey together had brought them both to this moment of joy and fulfillment. In the quiet hours after the celebration, Elena and Marco sat together once more, sharing a simple loaf of bread and reflecting on their journey. They had faced hunger, loneliness, judgment, and doubt, yet through it all they had discovered the transformative power of kindness, friendship, and love. The bakery had become a symbol of hope, a place where hearts could heal, and a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, human connection could shine brightly. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the bakery, the strength of her own courage, and the steady presence of Marco beside her. She realized that life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The stale bread she had once accepted with quiet resignation had been replaced with warmth, nourishment, and the knowledge that she was seen, valued, and loved. Marco, too, felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. He had given kindness without expectation, shared his heart, and discovered that the quiet moments of connection could bring more joy than years of solitude ever had. Together they had created a life that was richer, fuller, and brighter than either could have achieved alone. As the village settled into the calm of evening, Elena and Marco looked out over the rooftops, the soft glow of the bakery illuminating the streets below. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but they were ready to face them together, strengthened by the bond they had built and the kindness they had shared. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of bread and friendship, they understood something simple yet profound, that even in a world that could be harsh and indifferent, hearts that cared for each other could create light, hope, and lasting joy. They had learned that love, in its quietest and most genuine form, was not about grand gestures or wealth, but about the simple acts of kindness, patience, and shared humanity that transformed lives, one loaf at a time.